didn't lose. The election was rigged.
By who?
By the Democrats, and actually, interestingly, by the Democrats, but by local Democrats, meaning state Democrats. They outsmarted state Republicans. You know what I do? I do two things. I run a country, and we cut taxes, and we did all of the things, regulations, Space Force, all of the things. The VA was taken care of, like 91% approval, all of the things I did. I ran a country, and we ran it great. We've done more than any other president. Then I have to campaign. We had the greatest campaign in history. We had the biggest crowds anyone's ever had. I did 56 rallies where the number of people were incredible, okay, incredible, record-setting. And then I go home, and I watch the television to see how we're doing. And by 10:30 in the evening, it was over. We won. I got calls from everybody saying pros, people you know very well, saying congratulations. I say, let's not go so fast. I don't trust these machines, and a lot of bad things happen with these people. And in essentially 5 or 6 states, the local people who run it rigged the election. And tens of thousands. Remember they stopped the counting in the evening? Do you remember Georgia when they said, oh, we had a big flood? We had a pipeline break, a major water pipeline break. It turned out to be a false thing. And everybody, Brian, everybody ran out. They all ran out. Right. And where's the pipeline? Guess what? There was no pipeline. That was the people where they took all of those ballots, all of those Biden ballots, under the table with the black dress, and they took them and they started shoving them into a machine. What happened to this country is that we were like a third world country. And I do worry about the fact, you know, you asked the question, illegitimate president. That's what I worry about.
So now, in addition to Dominion voting systems, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, Republican secretaries of state and governors, the DOJ, the CIA, Hillary Clinton, and George Soros, we now have state-level Democrats who rigged the election. At this point, the list of who hasn't rigged the election against Trump is shorter than the list of who has. Now, a few points here. First is that Trump thinks that by claiming he cut taxes and created the Space Force, that he's somehow entitled to a second term. That's not how it works. You get a second term when you get elected to a second term. And Trump decidedly did not get elected to a second term, having lost by 7 million votes and an electoral college margin of 306 to 232. So he can wail about Space Force all he wants, but that's not going to change reality here. He then goes on to talk about how he did 56 rallies with big crowds. Again, I'm not exactly sure what Trump's logic is here, but unless 81 million people showed up to his rallies promising to vote, then simply having a rally doesn't entitle you to a second term, and it definitely doesn't mean you've won the election. And in fact, holding rallies in the middle of a pandemic might be why he didn't win re-election, considering it's been proven that his rallies have been super spreader events for this virus. So if anything, he's validating why he actually lost. Trump then says that by 10:30 p.m. on November 3rd, the race was over and he won. In reality, the race wasn't even close to being called for several days, and tens of millions of votes hadn't yet been counted. What he might be referring to was early leads in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which was to be expected considering the Republican legislatures in those states made it so that early votes wouldn't be able to be processed and counted until Election Day at the earliest. And because early votes had overwhelmingly favored Biden and Election Day votes overwhelmingly favored Trump, that would give him the optics of an early lead, which is exactly what he wanted. Because then Trump could turn around and say, well, I was winning, and then all of a sudden the Democrats found thousands of votes. Rigged election. And that is quite literally what he is doing right now. Donald Trump is where subtle strategies go to die. Trump even brings up the specific conspiracy theory of votes being brought in suitcases in Fulton County, Georgia, a reference to this video here.
That's significant, Trace, because the video in question that Rudy Giuliani presented at the state capitol behind me that alleges to show Fulton County workers illegally counting ballots with no supervisors present, well, that's just not the case. If you talk to the officials here, the Secretary of State's office telling Fox News they've investigated the video, these claims, found no wrongdoing, and that they had a designated observer the entire time in that location, which has been the case actually since June. Now, the state's election chief, Gabe Sterling, tweeted this a little after 6 a.m. this morning, Sam. The 90-second video of election workers at State Farm Arena purporting to show fraud was watched in its entirety by Secretary of State investigators, shows normal ballot processing.
Only this has already been thoroughly debunked. According to two high-level officials with the Georgia Secretary of State's office and a state elections board monitor who conducted investigations, there was nothing suspicious about the video. First off, there were not suitcases, there were standard ballot containers. And as far as the ballots inside were concerned, those inside the container had already been removed from their envelopes and processed while election observers for both the GOP and the Trump campaign were present. Gabriel Sterling, Georgia's voting system implementation manager and a Republican, said, quote, "If you look at the videotape, the work you see is the work you would expect, which is you take the sealed suitcase looking things in, you place the ballots on the scanner in manageable batches, and you scan them." And finally, despite conspiracy theories stating otherwise, the media and observers didn't leave because they were told to, they left once the opening of envelopes was completed, and they were free to return any time, although Georgia law doesn't mandate that they be present for the counting. Francis Watson, a Georgia election official, explained, quote, "Nobody told them to stay, nobody told them to leave, nobody gave them any advice on what they should do, and it was still open for them or the public to come back into view at whatever time they wanted to, as long as they were still working." In other words, per usual, this is nothing more than Trump making a mountain out of a molehill to advance his own agenda. Trump even has the audacity to claim that the supposed fraud makes this like a third world country. Right. It is the non-existent fraud that makes this like a third world country, not the despotic authoritarian demanding that he won the election despite quite literally losing the election. No, that part's totally fine. It's the fraud, supposedly perpetuated by members of his own party, that he's had 59 chances in court to prove and yet has failed to do so on every occasion. Got it. But besides all of this, truly the most ironic part here is Trump pretending to be worried about an illegitimate presidency. Donald Trump, who is trying to remain in office despite losing by 7 million votes in the popular vote, despite losing by a margin of 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, despite losing 59 court cases, despite getting shut down by a 6-3 conservative majority Supreme Court twice, despite his own Justice Department admitting to no fraud, despite the DHS's cybersecurity czar admitting this was the most secure election in history, despite every single Secretary of State of both parties standing behind the results of their state's elections. But he's worried that Joe Biden's presidency is illegitimate. What is abundantly clear is that no matter how many smoking guns or fraud claims or conspiracy theories Donald Trump cooks up, he's not going to manifest this alternate reality that he's hoping for. He lost the election. So he'll continue to lie to his supporters so he can keep grifting money and coddling his damaged ego, or even using this as leverage to run again in 2024. But whatever the reason, it's not only completely baseless, but widely debunked. He is a demagogue who's cried fraud before, and he'll cry fraud again, because the lying isn't a bug, it is a feature. And the faster people recognize this, the more secure this country will be moving forward. If you like this video, please check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I take a deep dive into the week's most important stories and interview major players in politics, including Kamala Harris, Katie Porter, Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, Eric Swalwell, Mary Trump, Al Franken, Cory Booker, and many, many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.